Welcome back to the channel. This will be my transfer plans for Game Week 4. We are in the middle of an international break and I've only got one free transfer at my disposal, and I'll also be discussing FPL Challenge at the beginning of this podcast and finalizing that squad as well as my FPL team in the deadline stream in a couple of weeks time. So I got 84 points actually in FPL Challenge, if only I did that in Fantasy Premier League. And for the upcoming game week, the challenge is called Rivalry, so any Man United or Man City players will score double the number of points, and I've currently got Bruno Fernandes and Erling Haaland in my setup, and the latter is currently my captain. In goal, I've got Alisson away to Burnley. Liverpool are top of the clean sheet odds, and I'll be discussing them in an upcoming free hit video. And I got Daniel Munoz at the heart of that defence, facing Sunderland at home. I've also got Mohamed Salah, who doesn't have a great record against Burnley, by the way. Only 1 goal and 2 assists across 10 matches against them. And Mateta would complete this starting 11 or starting lineup facing Sunderland at home as well. And if I were able to make a transfer in the forward line, I think Mateta would be near the top of my priority list. But of course, Erling Haaland isn't too shabby facing Manchester United. So if you want to join my FPL league, the code is WFF0U7. You'll see it throughout most of this video in the graphics and also in the description. There is an auto-join link. The same goes for FPL Challenge, where the league code is HWWQV4. We are also closing in on 35 subscribers, and by the time this video is published, we might have already achieved that goal, and it's all thanks to your support. Afterwards, we'll be pushing on towards 36,000 and beyond. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also hit the notification bell so you're always up to date with my content, both FPL and UCL Fantasy. I have created a first draft for the Champions League already, so you can watch that video right now, and stay tuned for even more content throughout the international break. That includes a best free hit squad, a predicted lineups, potentially a UCL Fantasy chip strategy, even more drafts, and of course more team selections for both fantasy formats, as well as deadline streams and reactions. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. I won't sugarcoat it. Game Week 3 was a disaster and my worst match day up until this point, but it wasn't too shabby between the sticks because my main goalkeeper, Robert Sanchez, delivered a clean sheet in a 2-0 win over Fulham in that early kickoff, and it was a bit fortuitous, but ultimately Chelsea have improved defensively, and I think Sanchez is one of the best goalkeepers at 5 million. Chelsea's long-term fixtures aren't particularly great, but I still think they'll get plenty of wins, a couple of clean sheets along the way, and this is a nice entry point into that Blues defence. But you've also got Tosin Adarabioyo, who got DEFCON against Fulham, and he was very close to doing it against West Ham in that 5-1 victory as well. So at 4.5 million, that could be one to monitor. And Marc Cucurella offers stability and consistency at 6.1 million. But I'm very happy with my choice of goalkeeper, and while it wasn't an amazing score, all you need is a 6-pointer from your main goalkeeper. As for my defensive line, it was very disappointing. Pedro Porro got DEFCON points retrospectively, and I don't like it when bonus points or DEFCON is allocated hours or days afterwards. I think it should be quite stable and things should be secure. And you've also got this imbalance of players who feature towards the very end of the game week. They won't have that same luxury of having additional bonus points or DEFCON being added to their score, as we saw with Pedro Porro. But he got 4 points. That means he hasn't blanked so far this season, but Murillo and Konsa have been terrible picks for my FPL teams. Konsa was red carded in Game Week 1, but he was on my bench and he got a 3-pointer, and yet he still outscored some of my starting defenders like Frimpong at the time. But Konsa got a 1-pointer this time round against Crystal Palace in a 3-0 loss at home. That was Aston Villa's first defeat at Villa Park since Game Week 2 of last season when they lost 2-0 against Arsenal. But Murillo has been a terrible pick. He is not even close to getting DEFCON points, and of course need 10 defensive actions to secure those 2 additional points. And Nottingham Forest lost 3-0 at home against West Ham, which was one of the biggest shocks and upsets of the entire game week. Looking at my midfield, one of the biggest regrets I have is benching in die for Reinders towards the last few seconds of that deadline stream. So I cost myself 5 points, but the biggest concern and also regret I have is not buying Bruno Fernandes and captaining him. That would have been a free transfer, and it also would have meant starting in die, and the swing ultimately led to 20 points being lost out just like that. And FPL can be like this from time to time. Mohamed Salah was my vice against Arsenal. He blanked against the Gunners and played quite poorly. Cody Gakpo was a bit more lively, but still, I think all of the attackers from that game were quite underwhelming, and it was decided by a moment of magic from Dominic Szoboszlai from that incredible free kick. And Ismaila Sarr was a slight positive. He scored towards the end of the game against Aston Villa. He has a terrific record against them with 8 goals against the Villains throughout his career. But at what cost? Because he picked up an injury towards the end of that game, and now he is set to miss out for between 4 to 8 weeks, and I don't think he'll be back anytime soon. I covered his injury update in the Transfers podcast and discussed what we should do with him, but I think at a similar price tag, if you can stretch to it, Semenyo would be a great long-term replacement, even though he has never scored or assisted against his upcoming opponent Brighton and Hove Albion. With my forward line, it was a little bit better, with the likes of Joao Pedro getting a 9-pointer, but he's so template that really any returns he gets won't lead to significant rank rises unless you captain him. Chris Wood, though, took the armband, and that's back-to-back weeks where I captained a striker and they let me down big time. It was Ollie Watkins last time out and Chris Wood. Both of them had great records against their respective opponents. So Watkins faced Brentford last week and he virtually always scores against them. And Chris Wood had 8 goals in 13 matches against West Ham throughout his career. He had one big chance, but he kind of fumbled that opportunity. And I think West Ham deserved to win, especially towards the end of that game where they really took control of that match. And Nottingham Forest were maybe quite fortuitous to not lose by even more than 3-0. But I think picking these Forest players and also taking that -4 hit for Sarr and Chris Wood has ultimately cost me dearly, and buying Bruno Fernandes for free and starting in Die is what I should have done for Game Week 3. So on my bench I had Dubravka, but really that was irrelevant because Sanchez did the business. Indai got a 7-pointer and had a goal ruled out for offside towards the beginning of the second half, and I think Wolves is certainly a fixture to target this season. And my other players were Renildo Mandava, who only got a 1-pointer despite Sunderland winning 2-1, and they have been very impressive at the Stadium of Light. And Gabriel was close to securing a clean sheet, but that was wiped out towards the end of that match, and I think both teams were quite cautious and conservative and didn't deserve to score. Liverpool's XG was only 0.52, but that free kick was incredible, and that would be enough to win any football match. In terms of my rank though, it was absolutely disastrous because I essentially doubled my rank to 3.4 million after a relatively decent start, but if you compare it to this time last year, I was around 200 to 400,000 after 2 or 3 game weeks, so this is definitely a downgrade and I need to get things going very quickly and build some momentum after the international break. But that injury to Ismaila Sarr kind of sums up my week. Even though he scored and he was very close to getting bonus points, he was booked just before being subbed off, and now he's set to miss out between 4 to 8 weeks due to injury, and Crystal Palace will also miss Adam Wharton for around 3 weeks as well. So I think there's a lot to think about, and whilst my team isn't terrible in terms of the individual picks, the likes of Murillo just simply haven't been good enough, and I think with Konsa, it was really a fixtures pick, and he hasn't done the business whatsoever, and captaining the likes of Chris Wood and Watkins has just been an absolute disaster. I need to captain more reliable options like Joao Pedro, Salah, and obviously Erling Haaland if I get him over the next couple of weeks. But let's discuss some transfer plans because there's a lot up in the air, and I'll talk about my final plans in my team selection as well. But with the prices, Robert Sanchez remains 5 million and Pedro Porro went up to 5.6 million very recently. Murillo is currently at 5.5, but don't be surprised to see him drop to 5.4 before the Game Week 4 deadline. But don't make early transfers to chase price rises and falls, and at this moment in time, only Calafiori is set to go up in price in terms of those promising players from a fantasy Premier League perspective. Konsa is still 4.5, while Salah is the most expensive at 14.5. Gakpo is 7.7, so he has been very impressive so far this season. Rangers cost 5.7 million, and Ismaila Sarr would have been very popular facing Sunderland at home and then West Ham away, but that injury will probably mean a price drop fairly soon. Joao Pedro does cost 7.7 million, and Chris Wood as well. Both of them have been very decent so far this season, but Chris Wood scored a brace in Game Week 1 against Brentford, and that's back-to-back blanks now. I would expect him to get things going again around Game Week 5 and 6 against Burnley and Sunderland back-to-back. And Ollie Watkins costs 8.9 million, and he could go down even further if he doesn't get his act together as well and finally produces some goals. But I think he will do so in the coming weeks, and it could be against Everton away in Game Week 4. As for my bench, Dubravka still costs 4 million, but that could be 4.1 fairly soon. Indai is 6.5, but all the attention will be on Jack Grealish, who currently costs 6.7 million. Reinildo costs 4 million, and to be honest, Goodmanson has been the best at that particular price point, and Gabriel does cost 6.1 million, but Arsenal have some tough fixtures coming up. After Nottingham Forest, it's Manchester City at home and Newcastle away. Then there's a positive fixture swing, which starts with West Ham at home in Game Week 7, but the Gunners lost against them by a 1-0 scoreline last season, so it won't be that easy in the grand scheme of things. But one of my transfers is Murillo to Munoz, and that would be like for like, and it would leave me with 0.7 million in the bank, which is what I currently have at this moment in time, and I could see Munoz rising in price fairly soon as well. So this could be a nice swing in terms of team value, but most importantly, you've got a better clean sheet potential in Gameweek 4 and far more attacking threat in terms of goals and assists from open play. Munoz is a very exciting pick in FPL, but you've also got Lacroix for the defensive contributions. Tyrick Mitchell is decent, and the same goes for Mark Gay and Chris Richards. They are all under consideration, and the same goes for Jean-Philippe Mateta up front, but I just bought Chris Wood for a -4 hit, and those Burnley and Sunderland fixtures were a big part of that. To sell him now, despite the fact that he faces Arsenal away, and he might not even start that game, I still think that would be a poor use of my transfers. It was already a bad swing in terms of not going for Bruno Fernandes, but if I now decide to sell Chris Wood, I might gain some points this week, but in the long term, it might still be a bad decision on paper. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. And the same goes for buying Kudus to replace Ismail Assar. Kudus doesn't look like scoring whatsoever. He might get plenty of assists, and he will be the most nailed on Tottenham attacker, and their fixtures are appealing up until Gameweek 9, but I don't like Kudus' goal scoring threat right now. But it is West Ham up next. It could be La Ley del Ex, as they say in Spanish. You're always scoring against your ex-club, and Mohamed Kudus will certainly have a point to prove at the West Ham Stadium or the London Stadium, and maybe silence that West Ham crowd. It's a shame that Ismail Assar is injured. I liked him as a long-term pick. He also had the highest XG of any player against Aston Villa, and he has 3 big chances so far this season, but it ultimately means nothing if he's unavailable, and I don't think he'll be there for Crystal Palace between Gameweeks 4 to 7 at the very least. But another transfer I'm looking to make, which could result in a potential hit, is selling Murillo to Chris Richards, and that'll give me enough money to make a big upgrade up front from Ollie Watkins to Alexander Isak, who signed for Liverpool in a British transfer record, and this might not be a great pick for Gameweek 4, and I could see Ollie Watkins scoring against Everton away, so this would really be a long-term pick, and having Isak in place for Gameweeks 5 and 6, which is where I think he'll get his first start for Liverpool, either against Everton at home or just a little bit afterwards, but that is what I talked about in my recent podcast. I believe Isak will be on the bench against Burnley at Turf Moor and then start against Everton in that Merseyside derby. But let's discuss my provisional team selection for Gameweek 4, and I think information is so important, and I will be waiting for official reports when it comes to injuries. But Robert Sanchez will be in goal facing Brentford away, and Chelsea are unbeaten at the GTEC Community Stadium, but the overall record against Brentford is quite shaky, especially at Stamford Bridge, and it hasn't been a happy hunting ground for them with a lot of draws in the process. But I think this season they'll be massive favourites to get a comfortable win away from home, but I think a clean sheet isn't guaranteed there in that London derby. As for my defensive line, I'm going for 3 defenders right now with Pedro Porro, Gabriel and Ezri Konsa, and on paper their chance of a clean sheet are fairly decent, especially in the case of Arsenal facing Nottingham Forest at home. But Aston Villa are the only team in England's top 4 leagues to have not scored a goal so far this season, and they have been very underwhelming. But defensively they've still been fairly decent. They conceded 1 goal to Brentford, and I know Crystal Palace was a bit of an anomaly and they conceded multiple big chances in that game, but they also kept a clean sheet in that goalless draw against Newcastle back in Gameweek 1, where Konsa was sent off, and they still did pretty well to hold on to a positive point there at Villa Park. As for my midfield, I'm well aware that Ismail Assar will probably not feature, and this is where I'll talk about some of my alternatives. Do I rely on someone on my bench, or do I maybe make a transfer and bolster my Gameweek 4 prospects in the process? But Salah, Gakpo, Reinders and Ndiaye look fairly decent this week. I have a clash, of course, between Ndiaye and Konsa in my starting 11, and Reinders has been disappointing since that massive return against Wolves back in Gameweek 1, but it is Manchester United at home, and I think Man City could still score multiple goals in that game. But you have to say, under Ruben Amorim, United have been better in the big games and fairly difficult to beat, so maybe the likes of Reinders will be fairly disappointing once again, but it all depends on the starting 11 and whether Reinders has that license to make those late runs into the box and be in those really promising positions and get on the end of big chances. But Salah and Gakpo look very appealing on paper, facing Burnley, who might be the worst team in the Premier League, but that remains to be seen over the coming weeks. But Salah's record isn't good against Burnley, which I talked about at the beginning of this video. 1 goal and 2 assists in 10 matches, and Cody Gakpo doesn't have a great record against them either. I believe he has 1 assist across 2 matches against Burnley, but they should still be very promising. And the same goes for my forwards. João Pedro facing Brentford away, and Ollie Watkins, who has a good record, at least away from home against Everton. I was going to say at Goodison Park, but of course they are playing in a new stadium now, the Hill Dickinson Stadium, but Ollie Watkins can still turn things around for Aston Villa. And David Moyes' first game for Everton since his return, of course, last season was a 1-0 loss at home against Aston Villa, where Ollie Watkins scored the winner. And if it was a repeat of that, I'd take that all day long with Konsa and Watkins both in my starting 11. As for my bench, I've got Dubravka facing Liverpool. There's no chance I'd start him over Robert Sanchez. Chris Wood is first on my bench, and he could be relied on to replace the injured Ismaila Sarr. And I've also got Murillo facing Arsenal away, and Reinildo Mandava facing Crystal Palace away. I don't think they're terrible options, and this could be the first time that the likes of Milenkovic, Nico Williams, and Murillo get DEFCON points in that tricky game against Arsenal. Then you've got a decent chance of a clean sheet against Burnley and Sunderland back-to-back, so I still think it could be worth holding on to these Nottingham Forest defenders. But you've also got Tarkowski, who is getting DEFCON in every single game, multiple Palace defenders like Lacroix and also Daniel Munoz, who are very appealing, especially this week. You've also got Arsenal defenders for those that haven't gone there, and in terms of defenders that I'd like to buy, Virgil van Dijk would be right up there, and he obviously produced his first return of the season against Arsenal in that 1-0 victory. But when it comes to the captaincy, I'll keep it quite simple. Despite a poor record against Burnley, Salah will take the armband, and I think for those that have Erling Haaland and Salah, there is definitely a debate to be made this week. João Pedro is currently my vice, but the other captaincy options that would be considered include Cody Gakpo and potentially Ollie Watkins, but because of Aston Villa's poor start, I don't think I'm going to go there, but I am backing Ollie Watkins to score in the next couple of weeks, and I think it will happen against Everton away. And as for Chris Wood, he could come on from my bench to replace Ismaila Sarr. Otherwise, another possibility is buying Jean-Philippe Mateta and then having that Sunderland at home fixture being targeted for Crystal Palace, and that would be a 3-4-3 formation with a very appealing option this week in Jean-Philippe Mateta, who ranks very highly with the captaincy. Now, with expected points as well, it's a fairly decent showing according to Fantasy Football Hub, but Ismaila Sarr will soon go down because a lot of these algorithms will expect him not to start at all over the next couple of weeks. But Robert Sanchez has 3.6, Pedro Porro is at 3.9 in that London derby against West Ham. Gabriel's is quite high at 5.2 for a defender, and Ezri Konsa's is significantly lower at 3.3. Mohamed Salah remains the highest of any player this week with 8.2, and Cody Gakpo is at 6, but with 3 of the next 4 matches being away from home for Liverpool, I think he's even better at Anfield, so I'm not as enticed by Gakpo over the coming weeks, especially with the signing of Alexander Isak. Whilst I don't think that guarantees that Gakpo will drop to the bench, it is a possibility. I think one of him or Ekitike are the most likely to drop out to facilitate the arrival of Alexander Isak. Reinders has 4.4, the same as Ismaila Sarr, but that will change fairly soon. Indai has 4.7, João Pedro's is at 5.2, and Ollie Watkins is still quite high at 5.5. As for those on my bench, Dubravka has 3.1, but to be honest, he'd be quite lucky to get that sort of return. Chris Wood has 4.2, which isn't terrible, facing Arsenal away, but I think the long travel distances between New Zealand and the UK could cause some problems, and it wouldn't surprise me to see Igor Jesus start for Nottingham Forest at the Emirates. We saw something similar last season with Chris Wood on the bench. Murillo is at 3.2, and Reinildo Mandava is at exactly 3, so overall, this 50-man squad is decent, but there are some problems, and I think that injury to Ismaila Sarr has been a massive blow. Not only did I miss out on multiple points in Gameweek 3, but it has also cost me another transfer in the grand scheme of things, and I'd be very happy with a Bruno Fernandes next week. Despite the fact he's facing Manchester City, he is currently on 99 goals for Man United. He could easily make that 100 in that local derby, and there's also Chelsea at home on the horizon for the Red Devils, but Bruno Fernandes is fixture-proof, and all he needs is a penalty, but he's got multiple avenues to points with DEFCONs, goals, assists, and the set pieces. There are even more assets to discuss, and I'll be doing so in future videos, like the best free hit team. But before we get there, let me show you some alternative plans using the website, FPL.team. Planning in FPL can give you an advantage, especially when you visualize future game weeks and compare your chip strategies, transfer plans, and different avenues for your FPL squad. So be sure to check out the website, FPL.team. The same goes for live FPL.net, especially for price predictions, so you can keep track of that if needed. but Robert Sanchez would remain in goal. Everything is basically the same as what I discussed throughout this video, but buying Jean-Philippe Mateta for Chris Wood would give me that Sunderland at home fixture, of course, in my forward line, and I could even vice-captain Jean-Philippe Mateta, who is in my top 5 captaincy options for the game week, and the expected points is 55.2, but if we were to put Chris Wood in there, for example, it would be significantly lower at 51.7. That is a massive jump, of course, but the main advantage of having Chris Wood is targeting those Burnley and Sunderland fixtures over the next 3 game weeks. And let's say, for example, I went for Jean-Philippe Mateta in game week 4 and 5. I could have this sort of structure, and the expected points is a little bit lower now with Crystal Palace facing West Ham away as opposed to Nottingham Forest facing Burnley away. So the expected points is 54.2, and I could also buy Semenyo with that Mateta transfer. It gives me 0.2 million extra, which I can use to then buy Semenyo to replace the injured Ismaila Sarr, and that's when Bournemouth host Newcastle, and that would be a major advantage of signing Jean-Philippe Mateta. But maybe Ollie Watkins could be the sacrifice, despite the fact that I think Aston Villa will turn things around, score more goals. They made some good signings in the transfer window over the last couple of days, so I think Ollie Watkins will come good, and his stats weren't terrible against Crystal Palace. I'd be more concerned about Morgan Rogers at this moment in time, purely from a stats point of view, but I think Watkins will always offer you those big chances and sustainable numbers which can be transformed quite easily into goals and assists. So let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Would you buy Jean-Philippe Mateta for Chris Wood this week and then bench Ismaila Sarr, or would you just replace Sarr directly for a Kudus, for example, or an even cheaper midfielder? But as I mentioned before, a key advantage of selling Ollie Watkins or Chris Wood to Jean-Philippe Mateta is that it gives me enough funds to buy Antoine Semenyo to replace the injured Ismaila Sarr. So despite gaining a few points there in the Aston Villa fixture back in Game Week 3, that yellow flag, which will soon be a red one, and Sarr missing out for 1 to 2 months, that's going to be a massive blow for my FPL team, and it needs to be addressed very soon. Despite a promising start to this season, I still think Sunderland are there to be targeted, especially away from home, so I think the likes of Jean-Philippe Mateta will be a great option for Game Week 4, and I still like him longer term against the likes of West Ham in the following game week, and Crystal Palace's fixtures will turn for the better, of course, now, and Mateta scored his first Premier League goal against Aston Villa from the penalty spot. He also scored in the Europa Conference League qualifier against Fredrikstad a couple of weeks ago, but it has been a fairly underwhelming start for him personally in the Premier League, but I would expect him to turn things around fairly soon. He also scored in the Community Shield final against Liverpool back in August, but this is his heat map so far this season, and I think he'll be even better in the coming weeks with more promising fixtures on the horizon. But what will the departure of Eze mean in terms of creativity and not having Ismaila Sarr on the other side? Could Crystal Palace struggle a little bit in terms of creativity and attacking threat, even against the likes of Sunderland and West Ham? That remains to be seen, but I think Yeremy Pino could still be a decent replacement, of course, for Eze, and they've got other options in their squad to facilitate and also replace the likes of Ismaila Sarr. Kamada can play in that front three. They've also got the likes of Roman Essa and Deveni, who have a lot of potential as well, but Jean-Philippe Mateta is the standout Crystal Palace attacker. Then I'd be looking at the defenders like Daniel Munoz, Lacroix, and one of Richards or Mark Gay. Thank you very much for watching this video and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it insightful, then like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also hit the notification bell so you're always up to date with my content, both FPL and UCL Fantasy. Keep your eyes peeled for more content throughout the international break, and thank you very much for helping me achieve 35,000 subscribers. Follow me on X, Instagram and Blue Sky, DylanRCM, and check all the links in the description for my Patreon and the Championships, further access to my videos, amongst many other perks, and it's also if you want to support the channel even further. There's my Discord server, the FPL League and Spotify in the description as well. I'll see you very soon for more deadline and reaction streams for FPL, and keep your eyes peeled for even more UCL Fantasy content.